I wish my grandmother were still alive, because she was born in 1910 and could have told us some interesting stories about the war years in America. Um, she's been gone for a long time, and she would be 109 years old right now, so she probably wouldn't be saying much at this point, anyhow. But there really aren't any World War One survivors left. So if you want to hear first-hand accounts of the war, you have to look up old things. Um, Peter Jackson just did a documentary called "And They Shall Never Grow Old." Um, if you're interested in what it was like for the British and the Anzacs, Australia, New Zealand Army Corps during World War One, you should look that up. I think HBO has rights to it now, but it's probably out for rental, or to purchase for streaming on Amazon Prime. We won't have time to watch it in class, or I would love to. It's got a few curse words and a little bit of other stuff in it, but for a mature young adult as yourself, I'm sure you could handle that and learn a lot. And welcome. Oh, sorry, I smiled too early. To history with Mr. E. Today we're going to talk about mobilizing for war. How did America get ready for WW1, which we didn't call that at the time. We just called it war, or the war in Europe. And then it was after the war, it was named the Great War. But now we call it World War One because guess what? We fought a second one shortly thereafter. The first thing was the Selective Service Act. All men from age 21 to 30 were required to register for the draft. 21 to 30. Later on, they amended that to 18 to 45. When I turned 18, I had to go register for the draft. And hopefully I'll make it another 5 years without having to go to war, because I'm just not built for war. I'm more built for Chinese buffets. 24 million men registered for the draft. The first men called to the draft, their draftees were set into classes. The first men called to the draft were unmarried and without dependents. So the young single men were the first called. America set up 32 Army training camps and basically founded a brand new Army and a brand new National Guard. Student Army training corps became popular in college, and women served in the armed services, but not in a fighting capacity, more in a service capacity. We needed nurses, we needed clerical, we needed aid workers, and things like that. Our army grew from 200,000 that year to 4 million men. The cost of the war was $33.5 billion, plus veterans' benefits over the years, plus post-war expenses. 1/3 of that cost was covered by taxes, and 2/3 was covered by American investment in war bonds. War bonds that we called Liberty Loans or Victory Loans. Liberty Loans or Victory Loans. And they would campaign all over for it, especially during World War II. They actually made a movie about how the guys who planted the flag on Iwo Jima went around to try to sell war bonds. Captain America sold war bonds before he got to be the first Avenger. But income tax was increased. Luxury items were taxed. Inheritances were taxed. And the government funded the war. They also received $4 billion in aid in aid money donated for aiding people overseas, which I think is pretty great for Americans. I mean, it's no send a text to Michelle Obama to help out Haiti or anything, but Americans responded in kind. We were a wealthy nation, and we had some money to give at this time. We formed the War Industry Board to regulate all phases of industrial production and distribution, to set prices for industry, and we told manufacturers what we needed them to produce. And we told them who to sell to through the government. There was a man who ran that named Bernard Baruch. The federal government also controlled the railroads during the war under William G. McAdoo, and the railroads took $800 million in losses to the war effort. That's a lot of losses, but it was the war effort, and so it was justifiable, apparently. Shipbuilding also went crazy. Shipbuilding, don't let your minds wander. Shipbuilding went crazy, and by 1918, 350,000 workers in 341 shipyards on the American coast were working at full bore with the motto that ships will win the war. And in a way, they did. Because our shipping, we had to get over to France. Because of the strength of our shipping, we were able to put an almost continuous convoy of ships going toward Paris, where we disembarked most of our men. Samuel Gompers from the AFL, American Federation of Labor Union, stated this is labor's war, and worked very hard on the National War Labor Board, which is a court of arbitration for, to how to get workers to do their best, how to get them paid, and, how to keep our factories running. The National War Labor Board was headed by William Howard Taft, but everybody just called him Chubsy Ubsy at this time. Unions grew, and by 1920, after the war, the American Federation of Labor was up to 3 million members, which had doubled in size over the war. Wages rose, but that's good because the cost of living was rising, and we were paying income tax. The Food Administration of the war was under Herbert Hoover, who would later become president. He encouraged farmers to plant more crops. He didn't want any rationing during this war. So Americans were free to buy and what they wanted, but he encouraged two of the worst ideas in the history of America, wheatless Mondays, so don't buy, make, or eat any wheat on Monday, and meatless Tuesdays. I can't even. He also encouraged Americans to use less sugar and to grow and raise your own vegetables in what we called victory gardens. I think that's a great idea, but it's not always easy to do, with climate and soil. But to share among your neighbors too. What if I have good soil for planting green beans, but I need some tomatoes? Well, go and make a barter and get yourself some tomatoes for some of those green beans. In August of 1917, we started fuel administration and had to ration fuel in homes and factories. And fuel meant more than just gasoline. It meant coal. We also encouraged heatless Mondays. So apparently they could go around and collect all the frozen dead people on Dead Person Tuesdays. This is when we enacted daylight savings time. And they put out laws that said that no one was allowed to drive on Sundays or holidays. They also discouraged walking on Sundays and holidays because it could get cold or hot, depending on the time of year. 1 million women joined the workforce in factories because the men were off fighting the war. Many retired men went back to work. And Boys and Girl Scouts collected scrap and peach stones for whatever reason. I don't know if peach stones were used as part of the war or ground up for something, or they just really liked peaches in Europe, and we're going to plant a bunch of orchards afterwards. The book doesn't really say. We also had the Committee for Public Information to keep up morale. We put up billboards, we put up signs, we put up posters everywhere supporting the war effort and discouraging, anti-war sentiment. To that end, we also renamed a few things that were German. For example, we renamed sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage. Liberty Cabbage. Hamburger steak was renamed Salisbury steak. That doesn't even seem that far off. German measles were called Liberty measles. And we stopped teaching German language in schools. And we stopped playing German music in orchestras. I wish they'd outlawed and never brought German chocolate cake back, because that stuff's disgusting. It's like that brown stuff that they call icing is full of slime, and then you bite into it and realize it's not just slimy, it's full of flippin' coconut. But I digress. We haven't talked about the last part today. It's the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act put forth stiff penalties for information that was, espionage-style information that was stolen. We would punish those who do this. We would punish those who utter, which means say, if you don't know what the word utter means, but utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the United States or its government. So there would be severe penalties for those who utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about our government, about the U.S. or its government. So free speech took a knock during this era, but if free speech was going to hurt your nation, then maybe we should limit free speech to the point where, or decide that, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a flippin', commie, but if free speech takes away the freedoms of the American people, then perhaps it's not free speech anymore. Many thought that speeches against the government presented a clear and present danger to the United States during wartime. There's even one socialist named Eugene Debs who was arrested and imprisoned because of this. We'll talk more about that later. Or maybe not.